ran 125 in a row. And then he ran the Boston after that. 7-time Muay Thai world champion. He had a fight in Vegas and he ran a marathon in the morning and then he knocked the guy out in the third round after. Holy shit.
Today, we've got a great one for you. We have my friend, Jeff Lerner. Jeff, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being with us.
I'm so grateful to be here, Tom. Ever since you were a guest on my show, I've been looking forward to round two. So thanks for having me.
Here we are, round two. So Jeff is actually he's a personal friend of mine. As he just said, I was on his podcast. I stalked Jeff Lerner for a while. I saw him online. I was impressed. I read so much about him. I just kept peeling the onion back and peeling it back and peeling it back because I was so impressed with Jeff and his life and the things that he's overcome and how quit-proof he's been to get to where he is. So let's just jump right into it. Jeff, again, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's just start where everybody starts, which is give us a rundown of what your childhood looked like.
So, okay, childhood. I'll follow instructions here. I'll start with childhood. Childhood, defining elements were I was an only child of two successful working parents. But very successful. My mom was an attorney and my dad was an institutional stockbroker. And then he became a wealth manager, high net worth client wealth manager. So they were both very busy from 6 a.m. to usually about 6:30 p.m. They were doing their careers. And as an only child, that meant I had a lot of time alone to thrive alone or suffer alone or succeed alone or fail alone or be happy alone or be depressed alone. I had a lot of time. And then I would say so that was kind of one defining element was and I think I'm thinking of what are the things in my childhood that are germane to my adulthood? And that's one is I'm really, really good at being alone and entertaining myself or applying myself or building a business by myself or learning an instrument by myself like that. I don't need people around to be okay. The other thing is I was born with, and therefore will always have, a genetic disorder called Waardenburg syndrome, which really it can affect a number of different things in a person. I was very fortunate. It can make you deaf. I'm obviously not deaf. I'm grateful for that. It can make you have facial abnormalities like cleft lip, cleft palate. I don't have those things. I'm grateful for that. But it also very much impacts how you look. And, I feel as I'm in my 40s now, nobody really cares how I look that much. Right. But when you're a kid, looking different is death. It's like a black mark. Right. And so I was teased a lot, bullied a lot, ostracized, the shit beaten out of here and there. I mean, it was bad. I know, I've heard your story. Frankly, it wasn't as bad as yours. I mean, I was never in environments where it could get as brutal, perhaps, as some of the environments you were in as a child, but it still really sucks being marked as different from the day you're born as a kid. And so you put those two things together of I grew up having success modeled by my parents, and they were both self-made. Neither of them grew up with much. My mom put herself first through MBA school, then through law school. My dad put himself, they were all self-made and they supported each other. So I had great role models, a lot of time, and a very negative experience of other humans. So I kind of got this, I kind of grew into this person that would go it alone and rely on himself because he didn't really think he could trust or rely on other people. And, I think that sort of sets the stage for who I am now.
Well, I have a question. So one thing I want to point out is that sucks, right? So it's relative. Sucks.
Yeah.
I went through this, you went through that. It both sucked. So I think that one thing that's important to say is that it's completely relative. The other thing, my question is, how did you handle that? As far as all the bullying, being ostracized, all of that. I mean, that would make somebody, you've accomplished so much, you know what I mean? I'm interested to see why you didn't just lay down and quit. What was that like? and what was your demeanor? What was your attitude? Were you like, I'm going to fight back at this? How did that affect you?
This is going to sound weird because I'm going to have to sort of explain it, I think, for it not to sound weird. I always just sort of felt at a deep level that I was marked for something meaningful. Like I would almost say delusions of grandeur. Like growing up, I had these sort of ridiculous ideas that like, oh, well, the reason that I don't fit in society, or the reason that I don't play well with my classmates, or actually, I shouldn't say I don't play well, because I think I was fun to play with. They didn't accept me as integrating into their world. And I think from a very early age, I processed that as like, oh, okay, I'm meant for something more. And I actually don't know why I didn't process it as, oh, I'm meant for a miserable outcast existence. For some reason, I transmuted it into like, I'm meant for more, not for less. And that was just an early, like, I'd love to say, oh, well, I had this great mentor at a certain age that helped me believe I was, I had greatness or within me or whatever. But if I'm being honest, I just always kind of remember thinking like, well, like this is miserable. And I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't like emotionally wounded by the fact that I felt consistently rejected, but it never turned into, oh, I must be lesser than. If anything, it turned into, okay, I'll prove how wrong they are. I'll make them regret this choice. I will prove that they should have accepted me, but by the time they realize it, it'll be too late because I'll already be on to better things. And yeah, I literally always felt that way as a kid.
Well, that was a choice you made to actually be quit proof. And I think that's amazing. I think the universe and this is my personal opinion, is that you were destined for greatness, and that was inside of you. And that was just part of your DNA. And you just maybe didn't realize it at the time as far as where you are, obviously, but that's part of your DNA. That's part of who you were. And you were on your way, but you didn't choose to let that, literally or emotionally kick your ass to the point where you just went in a hole and hid.
Yeah, I'll give you a very quick anecdote that you in particular will appreciate, I think. So it literally in preschool, and I vaguely remember this, but my parents retold me this story multiple times. So in preschool, they did this thing that was called the MS Rockathon, which is, I can't remember if it's multiple sclerosis or muscular dystrophy. It was either MS or MD, but either way, it was called a rockathon, where literally kids, small children would play. They would go around we would go around to our neighbors. Like they sent me home with a little sign-up sheet, and I would go around to my neighbors and say, hey, we're going to, at my preschool, the kids, we're all going to sit and we're going to rock in rocking chairs. And for every hour that we rock in a rocking chair, I'd like to ask you to make a donation to support muscular dystrophy and or multiple sclerosis, whichever it was. And so it was like, oh, I'll give $1 per hour or $2 per hour, right? And so nobody expected, I think everybody was expecting like, literally I was 3 years old. How long can a 3-year-old rock in a rocking chair, like before they spaz out and have to go play with Legos or something? And so everybody signed up. I think one person, if the way my parents told the story, I'm sure there was some dramatization folded in, but it was like, oh, one person signed up for like $20. So I go to preschool with my sign-up sheet, I turn it in, and I literally rocked for 8 hours straight. I did not get out of the chair. I was holding my pee. At 3 years old, I had this like bizarre level of discipline to just rock, almost like Rain Man, like to just rock for hours and hold my pee. And to the fact when my parents came, my mom told the story, she passed away, but when they came to pick me up from school, they had to pull me out of the chair because I was like, no, I said I was going to do this as long as I could. And it's for a good cause or what, I felt like you guys told me the right thing to do was to stay in this chair. And now you're trying to drag me out of it. But that was like 8 hours later. Nobody imagined that a 3-year-old kid would stay in the chair that long. And I think that just was an early embodiment of like, well, if something is a certain way, I don't understand why it would change just because it gets hard.
That and just determination to hold the course, I think too, and that's a heck of an ultra endurance feat for a 3-year-old kid. So and thanks for sharing all that. That's I appreciate your vulnerability. When did you get interested in music?
I would say, I mean, I always loved listening to music. So in middle school, like around 7th, 8th grade, I started teaching myself to play the guitar because I figured out like electric, that was like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Alice in Chains. Well, maybe it was pre-Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam. So I guess it would have been Alice in Chains, like early 90s, grunge era. I don't know. I think music was pretty great back then in a lot of ways. And I wanted to be an electric guitar player because, again, like especially growing up with the disorder and the ostracization and being socially marginalized, like I just wanted to it's basically around the time that I wanted a girl to notice me. It's like, I'll play music. And so I was a self-taught electric guitar player, just enough, like I wasn't great, but it was enough to figure out like, oh, I've got a knack for this. Like I could pick stuff out by ear. I could listen to a song one time and remember what it sounded like and then go like pick it out. And even though I didn't know what the notes were, I just sort of had this intuitive sense of like, oh, I go up the fretboard, I go down the fretboard, or like, oh, jump up a string. And I would sort of magically land on the right fret. I realized my ear was pretty sharp. And so I just sort of had this early seed planted of like, okay, this is an aptitude, but I also didn't do enough with it to make it into I think there's a difference between an aptitude and a developed skill. And I just knew I had the aptitude. And then when I was 16, I was at boarding school. There's a whole story there. I got kicked out of my private school. I got expelled my sophomore year. So my junior year, I went to a boarding school. I'll briefly tell this story because I think it, again, sort of embodies this, like me being alone and having to figure out my own path has just been sort of a hallmark of my life. So I got expelled from my school sophomore year, and there's a whole story there about that was an early moment of like, call it anti-establishment. Like I got screwed over. I basically got framed for cheating, but I didn't really cheat. I mean, to this day, I will go to my grave like, I'm not guilty, Your Honor. I did not cheat my sophomore year of high school, but I was essentially set up by a teacher that didn't like me to use circumstances to claim that I had cheated, or that I had at least had a window of time, of unaccounted time, in which I could have. And I don't want to unpack the whole story because we'll be here too long, but like, basically I was like, fuck the man. I had a fuck the man experience sophomore year that got me kicked out of school wrongfully. And so that was it. I was done. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like, I already have a bad experience with my fellow students. People are assholes. Kids are assholes. I don't want to be a part of a society that would treat someone like this just because they were born a certain way through no fault of their own. I don't want to be a part of a bureaucratic administrative system, made up of teachers and administrators that would be a part of framing me for something that deep down they know it's because this one teacher doesn't like me. And they're all just kind of, look at what's happening in the world today, where all that's necessary for evil to triumph is good men to sit by and do nothing, right? Like, so everybody just kind of went along with it because it was easier than fighting for the kid that nobody else was fighting for. And so I was done. So I ended up at boarding school out of my parents were desperate. They're like, we got to find a place that he can go. And they didn't want to send me to public school because the public schools were pretty bad where I grew up in Houston. But then like within the first week of arriving at this new boarding school where I knew nobody, I was diagnosed with mononucleosis. So I was exempted from all my classes, and I was basically told, don't go around anybody because you're highly contagious. So there I'm at this new boarding school, and I'm literally forbidden to have human contact. So like my roommate, they moved him to a different room, and I was just alone again on this campus in Western Massachusetts where I didn't know anybody. And so I would go out walking every day. It was like social distancing before there was such a thing. I was like, don't go. I couldn't approach anyone. And I found this old abandoned music building because the school had just built a new music facility. And in this old building where there were no classes and no people, there was an old, it was out of tune, but it still worked. There was an old piano. And I remember like going, okay, I have a whole semester Nothing to do all this time. And I sat down at the piano and I knew I had a good ear. So I kind of started trying to pick something out and like not shitting you within, I don't know, an hour. I mean, it was the first time I sat down within that same session. I had this like profound spiritual, like voice of God experience that was like, this is it. This is your out. This is the thing that you can get good at so that you don't have to go do what everybody else does and trade your time away and trade your soul away just to survive. And so I right then and there, I was like, okay, I think the reason God gave me mono was so that I would have this semester to start becoming self-taught. And I started teaching myself the piano. And then at the end of that semester, my parents, mainly my mom, I remember I came home for Thanksgiving and I looked so sick. I had been holed up in this music building for 3 months, teaching myself piano, not socializing with anyone, not shaving, occasionally bathing. Like it was a bad situation. And my mom was like, okay, you're never going back. Like they had all been like, you need to stay up there. You need to make it work. This is a good experience for you. And then when I came home for Thanksgiving, it all flipped. And my mom was like horrified at the sight of me and probably the smell of me and was like, okay, you're coming home. So I came home and they put me in public school. But by then I didn't even go. I think I went to public school a few times. But eventually they got a call from the truancy officer at public school that said, Jeffrey's not even coming to class. We don't know where he is, but if he does, we're going to give him a ticket because he's breaking the law. He's skipping school. And it's because I was actually driving to the local university every day and sneaking into the music building. I had actually paid one of the music students to let me make a copy of their practice room key. And I was driving up there every day and going into a practice room and just teaching myself piano obsessively for like 8-10 hours a day. And then I'd drive home. My parents would think I'd been at school. And anyway, that's how that was the springboard into a career in music and ultimately dropping out of high school.
Did you already know how to read music?
I did. I had read tablature, which is for musicians. It's like it's a way of notating guitar music that puts the 6 strings and it puts numbers of which fret to play. But then they always put the actual musical score above it. So when I was ready to start learning what the notes were, I took the tablature and I correlated it to the note above it. And I started figuring it out from that. And it took a little while, but eventually I'd say within a semester, I got to where I could passably read sheet music.
Yeah. And you weren't just some average piano player. You ended up doing that professionally for money. I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah. I supported myself all through my 20s. So it took about 3 years of being self-taught to get, and obviously when my parents found out what was going on, they basically were like, listen, man, you've been a headache your whole childhood. I mean, they weren't rude about it, but they're like, it's obvious to us that you are not a kid that's going to like find his way on the traditional path. Clearly you've got your own program here and we support you, but we're also, these were self-made people. My parents, they're like, listen, make your bed, you're going to sleep in it. So if you want to drop out of high school to be a musician, you better get good enough to actually get work as a musician, because if you don't, you're going to end up working fast food the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And so what they did do though, was they bought a piano for my house. And so I was able to stop having to go sneak into the local university practice rooms. And I basically got to sit at home all day while I was 17. And so at 17, 18 and 19, I was basically just sitting home practicing piano like 12 hours a day. And at 19, I don't know, it took 3 years to actually I would say it took 2 years to get good enough to start getting gigs. And by gigs, I'm not talking anything glamorous. I'm talking my first gig was at this restaurant called the Reggae Hut, which was like a Jamaican, like Caribbean restaurant. And I would play for 4 hours and they would pay me with a plate of jerk chicken. So I would get like a $6 plate of chicken. It was really good chicken. I mean, I love
it.
Yeah. And so, but it took about 2 years to get good enough even to get a gig like that. And about another year after that to get good enough to actually, I was able to convince the University of Houston, that same school where I had been driving up to practice. I went and auditioned for them six semesters in a row. I went and auditioned for the piano faculty at that school. And I told them, I was like, I dropped out of high school. I'm self-taught, but look how good look how fast I'm coming along. And it was like the first audition, I was like, I can play Fur Elise, da, 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 da. And they're like, great. Every 10-year-old can play Fur Elise, right? So then the next semester, it was like, look, I can play the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Da, 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 da. And they're like, okay, well, every 12-year-old can play that. So, but admittedly, in one semester, you did improve 2 years. Good job. And so I went back 6 consecutive semesters until finally I was in there and I was like playing like a full-on Beethoven Sonata and Rachmaninoff Prelude. And they're like, wow, okay, you proved us wrong. We'll let you in. And I was able to actually get in to the music program at University of Houston. And ultimately I was able to get a scholarship as the first chair pianist in the jazz orchestra. And I was teaching myself jazz and improvisation and stuff this whole time too. But it took 3 years before I actually was able to get good enough. I don't think I was just empirically good enough. I think it was more that they just saw how determined I was and that I was going to keep coming and keep coming. Because again, God had told me in my heart, either get good at this or be miserable the rest of your life.
Right. But and it's great because intrinsically you're just straight up embodiment of Quitproof. You didn't quit. Yeah, they're like, yeah, we're to beat it, and you came back, boom, 6 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost the same as what you described in your childhood, where you just dug your heels in and said, I'm going to do this. And that's what at Quitproof we really work to try to empower people to do that. And you did it. That's just impressive.
Well, let me share another little anecdote to it, because I write about this in my book. What I have figured out in this world is that if you're notable, if you're a standout, and it's you stand out on the basis of character, not on the basis of like, getting attention. I mean, there's plenty of ways to stand out. I go walk down the street naked and stand out, but that's not a character-based way to stand out. When you stand out for reasons of character, literally the rules change in this world. And I've experienced this multiple times. And so there's a lot of conventional wisdom that says, oh, you can't do that. I'll give you an example. You can't drop out of high school and still go to college. Or you can't drop out of high school and still go to college and get a full ride scholarship. But in my case, I actually did 2 things. One, I kept persistently going back and kind of getting the, cajoling the awareness of the piano faculty open until eventually it was like every semester when it was time for auditions, they knew to look at the roster, say, when's Jeff Lerner coming in? They knew I was going to be back. So, but it took 3 years to gradually open them up to like, I was on their radar and they were invested in watching it. It's almost like they were rooting for me. Right. Yeah. But at the same time, I knew without a high school diploma, I can't actually enroll in a university. And so I had gone to the honors college, which is like a little liberal arts program inside this massive university, University of Houston, 50,000 students. And I knew that the university policy would not let me enroll. But this honors college, I had gone and talked to the dean and the associate dean, and like I had kind of figured out how the political system worked at the university, and basically found that the honors program could get exceptions made to enrollment policy. So then I went over to the honors college and I'm like, okay, how am I going to get their attention? So I filled out an application to the honors college and I wrote this essay. And this essay was called Graceland. And it was basically a story of a kid that goes to a theme park and gets enrolled in like the magic and the mystery and the wonder of the theme park, and basically decides he's never going to leave. So he ends up moving into the theme park and hiding out under one of the rides and basically living at this theme park because he wants to live in that world, not the real world. And obviously it was a metaphor for me because I felt so disenfranchised from the real world. And when I put the application, and so I wrote this essay because you have to submit a writing sample as part of the application for this liberal arts program. And I put it at the top, I put it in the folder so that it was on top. And I put, read me first or don't bother reading me. I wrote that at the top of the essay so that when they opened the envelope, before they went to my transcript, before they went to my academic record, before they went and saw the fact that I was a high school dropout, I wanted them to read the writing sample. Because I thought if they get to know me, at least they'll consider me. And sure enough, it worked. This lady, Jody, was the admissions person in the honors college, and she called me and she's like, come on in, let's talk. I want to hear your story. Obviously there's something going on here. And I won her over, and she went and got the dean to waive the admissions requirement. And then the music program admitted me, and I was able to basically get up. And because the music department wanted me for a spot in the jazz ensemble at the time, I was able to apply for a scholarship. And I literally ended up getting 10 years of college completely paid for, even though I had no high school diploma, and graduated magna cum laude with a degree in music composition with an emphasis in jazz piano and a minor in business finance. Never paid a dime, even though I dropped out of high school.
Okay. That not only is a great story, that's pink mohawk punk rock. I mean, that's just like awesome.
They'll change the rules.
If
you get good enough at certain things and you do it on the basis of demonstrated character, the world will change the rules for you. Mark my words.
And if you're listening to this podcast, listen to that. That's important information. That's important information. There's more than one way to quote unquote skin a cat, right? And as long as you don't quit, give up, give in, tap out, and quit, and find a way, there you are. So okay, you're at that point, you're a professional musician. I just love your story overall, and it's hard for me not to like pull the covers back and let you do it, right? That's how great your story is. So you start then playing piano professionally at places that are very exclusive and have very smart people at them. Can you tell us about that? Because it's important. This is I'm struggling not to just blurt it out. Okay. So
right. No, I love it. You're being a very disciplined host here, sort of teasing out the relevant details. And I appreciate that, how much you've done your homework, clearly. So yes, my first gigs, like I said, Reggae Hut, playing on a cheap, it was a Alesis keyboard. And then eventually I started getting gigs where the place actually had its own piano. That was a big step up. I got a regular gig at a steakhouse instead of jerk chicken. I was able to get like a, $40 ribeye, at least in payment. Eventually I started getting paid money. And so one of the things I did, I looked at the landscape of professional musicians in Houston, Texas, and I realized, okay, it's just like life. There's about 2% that has all the good opportunities, and 98% are just fighting over the scraps. And the scraps are like, oh, I'm playing at some bar out in the suburbs till 2, playing in a cover band, and I might make $50 and probably spend it all on beer and go home with some regrettable creature of the night or whatever, right? Like it was bad scene. Or there's a few gigs like, oh, well, if you're the piano player that plays, the Christmas holidays at Nordstrom, or that plays at whenever they do the receptions before the ballet or the opera, like the society arts scene, or if you can start getting the private party circuit at like wealthy people's house parties. And it was just obvious to me, like, okay, so there's all these musicians, but there's a few of them that like wear suits, get haircuts, have demos, like recorded demo CDs, and present more professionally. Clearly, I want to do that. I don't just want to be a bohemian, tag along my whole life. So I kind of did the same thing. I went and I started getting my schmooze on, and I networked my way into this one agency called Gulf Coast Entertainment, which was owned by a woman named Susie, whose husband was like a big commercial real estate, like society, they were in the society scene. And Houston is a very wealthy town because it's basically the U.S. center of the oil and gas industries. So you have all the major energy companies have their U.S. headquarters in Houston, a place called the Energy Corridor. A lot of money there. All the sports teams are owned by billionaires, just like probably any major city in the U.S. And so I networked my way in with the one booking agency that was wired into that scene and that booked all those gigs. And so I started. And it wasn't that I was the best piano player. And I remember telling Susie, I'm like, look, I'm not going to pretend that I have the same musical gifts as so-and-so who's been doing this. They're 50, 60 years old. They've been doing this for 40 years, but I'll always be on time. I'll always wear a suit that looks like it actually was cut to my body. I'll cut my hair. I don't smoke. I'll never smell like cigarettes. I won't drink on the gigs. I know how to appropriately interact with the guests where it's polite and deferential, but not too much. And And basically I will make you look good. When you send me to a gig, I will make you look good as the booker is what I basically sold her on. And she gave me a chance, and the feedback came back like, oh yeah, he was respectful. He was charming. He was pleasant. He played, they don't know. He played well enough. If they can tell that it's Jingle Bells, they're happy. Like
Sure.
they're not sitting there like an art critic, like,
Right.
you know, criticizing your playing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I started getting booked into all of these gigs. I mean, Jim Crane, I mentioned the owners of the sports teams. It's just to sort of embody the types of clientele I was playing for. Jim Crane, who owns the Houston Astros. I played his Christmas party every year, like 5 years in a row. Tillman Fertitta, who now owns the Houston Rockets, owns the Golden Nugget, owns lots of restaurants. What's that big one? River Cafe or whatever. Played his house parties. Bob McNair, who owns the Houston Texans, played his house parties. And anyway, so I started connecting all the dots here, and I'm like, man, who are these people that are like, they have these multi-million-dollar mansions. They're paying me $250, sometimes more dollars per hour to come, which was a lot of money in like 1999.
Oh yeah.
Or 2002 to go play a piano party for 4 hours and get $1,000 check and a $500 tip and be treated well. I'm like, who are these people? And what they all had in common was they were entrepreneurs. They had started their own businesses. And so I just sort of connected those dots. And I started to really romanticize these entrepreneurs, because it wasn't just that they had money. Like, remember, I grew up with successful parents. I grew up around a certain level of affluence, but more than that, the private school I went to, some of my friends or some of the other students, their parents were like ridiculously wealthy. So I didn't romanticize having lots of money, because frankly, I had been to households that were clearly, you know, multi-million-dollar mansions, only everybody was miserable because the family dynamic was so toxic. Like, you know,
Yeah.
when you go to your friend's house and you see their parents fighting, you sort of go, oh, I guess having money isn't, you know, the be all end all. So I didn't romanticize the money. What I romanticized was the creative freedom that these people seemed to be able to do what they want, go where they want, associate with who they want, and pay their bills. And I was the same as a jazz musician. I could do what I wanted, go where I wanted, hang out with who I wanted, only I didn't have the paying the bills part so figured out like they did. And so I was like, man, being an entrepreneur is just like being an artist. You get to create, you get to innovate, you get to manifest your ideas, only you also can make a lot of money. So that was my early cue to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the next thing, I mean, you go from being ostracized as a kid, kicked out of school, you figure your way into a prestigious school, and the next thing you know, you're rubbing shoulders with billionaires going, hey, I feel like I'm just as smart as these guys. Wow, how are they able to do that? And you figure it out, and then so everything seems to be going great. You're making money. You're figuring out how these extremely wealthy people do it. And then what happened?
So yeah, all through my 20s now, I'm playing piano. Like, basically my life was go to school in the morning, teach some piano lessons in the afternoon to make extra money, work on whatever the latest entrepreneurial idea is for a few hours, usually like between piano lessons. Like, a kid would cancel and I go, okay, I have 45 minutes to work on my brochure or whatever was called for. Then I'd go to my gigs, usually about 5 or 6 o'clock. I'd have to drive somewhere, get set up for the gig, play. Sometimes I'd play till 10 or 11. Sometimes I'd play till 2 in the morning, just depending on the gig. And then I'd come home. If it wasn't too late, I would work a few more hours on my whatever entrepreneurial thing, and then get up and do the same thing the next day. And that was basically my life for like 10 years in my 20s. I tried to get married. That didn't work. Like, I was on one track, and I was undistractable from that track. I wasn't even distractible by like having a wife. I mean, it was pretty OCD. And anyway, so I guess my business endeavors would they escalated each time. I had 11 different businesses that I tried in my 20s, and each one was a bigger risk and a bigger failure than the one before. Now, admittedly, when your entire startup budget is tip jar money, it's not like I was doing great world-changing things, but they were all like little incrementally bigger and bigger failures and setbacks. But also I was learning a ton. I mean, I tried MLM, I tried flipping houses, I tried starting a marketing company, I tried investing in a restaurant that was this little sandwich shop across the street from my house, where I gave him like $3,000 and tried to help him turn it around. And like, I just did all this random entrepreneurial stuff. And it finally escalated to, in 2007, I got these SBA loans to open up these franchises, which nowadays I never could have gotten those loans. But back then, if anybody remembers the credit bubble that built up prior to the Great Recession, they were literally giving loans to dead people back then. Like, anybody could get loans. And so I got these 2 bank loans in 2007 to open up these franchise restaurants, put my name on $500,000 in debt, open these 2 franchise restaurants. And a year later, the economy crashed, the Great Recession, the bubble burst, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, the collapse of energy prices. Like, basically my restaurants lost all their business in like 60-day period. And I was left holding the bag on $500,000 in debt. And I had actually started to develop arthritis in my wrist from too much practice, too much playing, because I didn't start till I was later in life and my hands just didn't work the right way, let's say. And so I was screwed. I was $500,000 in debt at 29 years old in 2008, backs against the wall. I'm hiding from creditors. I owe, I think, $330,000 to the bank. I owe $90,000 on 2 5-year commercial leases to landlords that have attorneys, and they're owned by real estate investment trusts. And I have, by the way, the SBA loans are guaranteed by the US Treasury. So I now have the United States government coming after me. And it was just, and then I had other, my manager had spent the money that was supposed to be saved to pay sales tax and employment tax and unemployment tax in the state of Texas. So I had the Texas Workforce Commission coming after me. Total just debacle. And so I went into hiding.
Yeah, you're on the lam.
Yeah, literally, I got evicted from my apartment because I couldn't pay the rent. I moved in with my wife's parents, and she and I were on the outs. We were already headed for divorce, but her parents took pity on us and let us move in with them. And so I literally, for a year, I lived in my wife's parents' spare bedroom, estranged from her, who was living in her old childhood bedroom. And it was really awkward because we shared a bathroom. So like every now and then you'd be like, "Hey, you in there?" She'd be like, "I'll be out in a minute." And I'm like, "This is my wife," but I'm like waiting for her to get out of the bathroom so that she doesn't have to see me. It's super weird. Really, really comfortable environment.
Well, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at the dinner table with you not there. And I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to rub it in or anything.
No,
how ironic is that? .com.
Well,
this is such a great story. I just love it. I mean, it's crazy.
And her dad was a mechanical engineer who had worked his whole life in a company that he actually embodied a lot of how I saw the world. He was a mechanical engineer. He worked his whole life in a small office with no window. I say his whole life, his whole working career. He worked in the same, 8x8 box with no windows as a purchasing manager for an oil field supply company that had been started by his father. So his father had been an entrepreneur, or maybe it was his grandfather. I don't remember. I think it was his grandfather, had been an entrepreneur who had partnered with somebody to start this business, really successful business. But then when his father, or let's say grandfather, again, I'm not remembering which, when he passed away, that person's wife, so either his mother or his grandmother, wanted it to be fair with the kids because he was the only one that worked at the company and his siblings didn't. So instead of letting him, who'd worked at this company, he worked at his dad's company his whole life, instead of giving him the equity, the parent or whoever this was sold the shares to the partner and then just divided the money amongst the siblings. So he is working at a company that bears his name. I don't want to say who it was, but I mean, literally in the name of the company is his family name because it was founded by his father or grandfather. But the wife, when the father, let's assume it was the father, when the father died, the wife sold the shares, divvied it up between the siblings. So he never got an opportunity to be an owner in the company. Instead, he was just kind of a, mid-level worker at his own family's company. And so I don't know if he was bitter about that or if it was just how he was wired. But the fact that I was like a striving entrepreneur who was intent on not having that life. Like I did not want to work in a box my whole life. He started to just hate me over time.
Oh, for sure.
Because I was like, every day I'm living in his house,
right?
working like 18 hours a day to try to get something going and make something happen and turn my life around. And basically I viewed failure as getting a job. And so in his mind, he's like, I've got this deadbeat son-in-law living in my house who defines failure as my life.
Right.
And yet he has the audacity to come live at my house.
100% for free, by the way.
Yeah.
So how the hell did you dig yourself out of that? Let's get to the good part in the story.
Yeah. So I found a platform that teaches affiliate marketing on the internet. And it was the same. It was like I was 16 again, sitting at a keyboard, only now it was a computer keyboard.
Right.
You know, teaching myself a new skill. Again, God is like, you better get really good at this, or you're going to have to do what most people do.
Yeah. You were definitely on the incentive program.
I was. And I, you know, as a 29-year-old jazz musician, it wasn't like I was going to go out and get some great job.
Right.
And even but frankly, that was a blessing because I didn't want to. And long story short, it took 18 months. And I paid off $495,000 in debt as a self-taught affiliate marketer with a course that I paid $395 for.
Okay, that's even better. I mean, than what I said was punk rock. So you're affiliate marketing. And so how does the idea of Entre come in? How does that come into the scene? How does that work?
So I dig myself out of debt, 18 months. It's now 2010 and I'm officially back. I'm back to zero. I'm not in debt anymore. I get to change my name back. Like I had actually changed the spelling of my last name to Learner, which a lot of people misspelled it that way anyways. Because I knew like literally the US Treasury was like,
you're on the lam.
$330,000 bank loan default. And so I'm like, so I remember like with PayPal, I'm like, as soon as the US Treasury gets a whiff that I'm online doing business, they're going to send a demand letter to PayPal and they're going to send them all my, like, I'm not going to be able to get this thing going. Right. And so I was like, I was just trying to buy time. So finally, after a year and a half, I get back to square one. I start spelling my name the right way again. And I actually remember telling my in-laws, hey, I get it. Thanks for the free rent. I'm out. I'm leaving. You don't have to deal with me anymore. Because they had no idea what I'd been doing. I had gotten to where I was making in a month what my father-in-law made in a year.
Oh man.
And they thought I was still just this broke loser living in their house.
Yeah.
So one day, and they knew I was $500,000 in debt. So when I emerged and was like, guess what, guys?
I'm out.
I paid off all my debt and I'm moving. I'm going to, where do you guys want to go? And I actually made a last ditch effort to save the marriage. And I said, let's move to Montana. Let's get a little cabin in the mountains. We'll fish and ski every day and just kind of reset and try to rebuild this marriage. And that didn't work out at all. But anyway, so that's what happened. So then basically that began a series of increasingly successful businesses, which I can give you very quickly. I did affiliate marketing for about 5 years. Then I got out of affiliate marketing for reasons that, we'll talk about some other time, but I pivoted into starting a digital agency. So then I started taking my skills of online marketing and using them to help local businesses all around the country. Started an agency, grew that agency for over 5 years. We ended up servicing almost 11,000 small and medium-sized business clients, had a team of over 50 people, got an office, built this, made the Inc. 5000 a couple times, built this really successful smaller business. And then finally was able to sell that. Along the way, I did a couple other things. I had a couple e-com stores. I started an online direct sales company that I grew to $1 million a month in less than a year. But then I wound it down because I didn't love that business. I don't like direct sales. It's people get weird and it's all just like money focused and toxic. But anyway, so I just sort of like found a knack that basically if it's on the internet and it involves marketing, i.e. human behavior. I got good at copywriting. I got good at media targeting. I got good at ad buying. I got good at building funnels. I got good at video marketing and presenting on camera. And I was like, oh, well, this is like a superpower set of skills, because it worked in affiliate marketing. It worked in e-commerce. It worked in direct sales. It worked in digital agency services. And so finally in 2018, I had totally turned my life around. I had generated, I don't remember the exact number. I've told the story so many times, but it was like upwards of like $40 million in revenue. And, you know, I got to keep, let's say the average company, the average business, I'm making like 20, 25% profit margin. So 10 years, 8-figure net worth, total life turnarounds, paid off debt, like all because of a set of skills. Correct. A set of self-acquired skills that, by the way, you cannot go learn in most universities. You can only teach them yourself in the school of hard knocks. And so in 2018, I was looking at my life and I was like, damn, that was quite a turnaround, you know?
Yeah.
I should start telling people, because I looked at the world and I'm like, people are so unhappy. They're so frustrated. They feel so stuck. They feel like they have no options. They spent all this money on a college degree. We're now heading into a world where whatever people majored in is typically obsolete by 10 or 20 years into their working career. Sure. But they're still paying off the student debt, while they're, you know, younger people with more relevant degrees are coming in to replace them and displace them. And like, basically the middle class is dying. The American dream is crumbling. Like I looked at the macro picture, and by the way, where we are right now today in 2023, I could see it in 2018. I knew this was all coming because I read a lot of economics. I read a lot of the Austrian School of Economics. I understand currency inflation. I understand monetary policy. I grew up, my dad was a money manager. I've always had a nose for business. I mentioned I was a finance minor. Like I was paying attention to where the world was headed. And I genuinely felt like I have a skill set and I have a story that could spell salvation for some people out there based on where the world is headed. And so I started making content to say, hey, how did a jazz musician who lost everything and was $500,000 in debt and was facing bankruptcy and, you know, got evicted and was depressed and like had this whole rock bottom reality. Yeah. And 10 years later, I'm a retired multimillionaire. Would you like to know how I did it? But it wasn't like, let me show you my 3-step system to make $1 million. It was more like, let's really talk about what's going on in the world and how is it even possible? And what do I represent in this world that is a contradiction to the mainstream narrative of what you were sold as a kid? And it caught on. It got enough traction that from that we were able to grow this platform, Entre Institute. That that was 5 years ago. We've enrolled about 275,000 students into some type of curriculum. We've helped launch over 30,000 businesses based on our metrics that we keep internally. And we've done about $200 million in revenue. And honestly, it's a pretty freakishly cool unicorn story. But it's fundamentally saying, hey, there's a system that's broken, and that system is built on lying to young people about what their future is going to look like if they'll essentially trade their whole lives to it. And we represent an alternative. And basically every working adult who has a midlife crisis feels the truth of what I'm saying at some level. And so I would say we're probably the biggest platform in the world where your 40, 50-year-old existentially angst-ridden breadwinners are turning to say, okay, what's an alternative to just continuing to trade my life away for a salary that's not keeping up with the rising cost of living, and clearly which I'm never actually going to be able to retire from.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really learned from your book. And I want to talk about your book before we're done, because you realize that the 40-hour a week for 40-year plan was broken and obsolete. And that's one of the things I really loved about your book too, is that how you go into that and you explain that. And we're so domesticated by the system to do that because they need worker ants to go feed the machine, right? And they don't care one bit of sacrificing you, stabbing you right in the heart, throwing you away and going, who's going to replace you? So the fact that you're exposing that and going against the grain and teaching people that there's not, okay, the 40-40 plan's obsolete, it doesn't work anymore, just stop your life and go away. No, here's your alternative, right? and plug them into that is just amazing. So tell us about your book. I loved your book, by the way. If you don't have Jeff Lerner's book, Unlock Your Potential, go get it. It is a life changer.
I appreciate that. That means a lot, Tom, especially from you.
Changed my life.
Thank you.
It changed my life. It did. That book changed my life. I want you to know that. I want you to know that, because you need to know that. And that's more fuel for you doing what you do. But I'm telling you, that book changed my life. I had no idea that that system was broken. How many times I told my wife, like, hey, you got to stop doing that. That system doesn't work. And I learned that from you. So I'm going to shut up, but go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'm really moved and honored. So thank you. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually needed that today. Like, I needed to know, because, like, especially, I mean, that's one of the things about the modern economy, and going back to my childhood and being alone, and it, like, in the modern economy, you can be really disruptive and do really cool stuff. And that's what's so awesome, is the modern world is this great equalizer. And I mean, you asked me to get into the book. This is like what the book says. I think I'm an example of it, right? The modern economy is this great equalizer of opportunity, right? Like, people talk about, we don't want equality of outcomes because that's communism. We want equality of opportunity because that's what democratic capitalism should be. Guys, we have it. Like, block out all the media noise that's like everybody's always so offended and disenfranchised and oppressed and bullshit.
Victimized. Yeah.
We have equality of opportunity. It's a grind. Like, it sucks. You're going to have to be alone. You're going to have to create value. You're going to have to do something disruptive. The only way to stand out in a world that's this crowded and this noisy is to be doing something different and disruptive, which means you have to have a level of character and personality development that you can endure through all the criticism, all the skepticism, all the doubt, because it's a paradox, right? Or almost like a catch-22. The only way to get attention is to do something disruptive. But if you're doing something disruptive that's principles-based rather than convenience and comfort-based, people initially are going to reject it because it threatens their status quo. And you're going to have to persist for a really long time. And probably you're going to have to rewire rejection to not be something that stops you, but to be something that encourages you, that you're getting closer to the flame. Because if you weren't, people wouldn't be so vehemently opposed to what you're saying and what you stand for. And, like, so there's all this character development, personal growth that has to happen. But I had been forged in the fire of self-made high school dropout, kind of like you, like all the shit that happened to us at a young age.
100%. We have so much in common. Yeah,
exactly. Had prepared us to endure. And so, what I would say now is, if you're willing to, and this is what we teach at Entre, this is what I teach in the book, is like, if you're willing to figure out what all the suck in your life has been for the sake of, basically the purpose toward which you are oriented, which I look at my life and it's like, okay, I was rejected by my fellow classmates, marginalized, literally abused, I would say, psychologically by that experience in high school where I was framed and I was expelled and I was literally rejected on the basis of something that wasn't even true, and certainly that I didn't create or control. Like, I had all these experiences and it was really freaking hard. Like, I probably literally considered suicide 100 times as a child.
I can't imagine you wouldn't. Yeah.
Because it's like Camus says, the only serious philosophical question is suicide. Like, you're either going to take yourself out of the game or you're going to accept the super bizarre rules of the game and stay in it.
100%.
You're never, there's no game that's like fair and logical. You're either in an absurd game or you take yourself out of the absurd game. That's the only choice. And so if you're going to stay in an absurd game that's populated with like insecure, psychologically fragmented, like short game, dopamine addicted humans, accept it. Accept that reality, right? And so, but I think that key right there, that long game versus short game, I'll sum it all up this way. Everybody's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Physiological needs, then safety needs, then call it social needs, which is like love and belonging, human connection. Then achievement needs, which is esteem, both self-regard and esteem and respect of others. And then like manifestation needs, which is self-actualization. The basic premise of society is you trade at least the top level, probably the second level, which is self-actualization and esteem. You trade those two in exchange for the illusion of security of the bottom 3 levels. Obviously, you have air and water. God took care of that.
Yeah.
But safety, like shelter, food, clothing, your basic needs will be met. And this is the biggie, love and belonging, your social needs. You will be accepted. You will be encouraged. You will be reasonably well regarded by the average if you sort of play along with the script. But for most people, that's where it'll stop. You'll never have enough achievement in your life to really have the prestige or esteem of others or yourself. You'll always be woulda, coulda, shoulda, regret. And certainly self-actualization, they get you to essentially defer that idea. Well, I'll get to that when I retire. Like when I retire, I'll pursue my passions. I'll write my book. I'll write my symphony. I'll maybe I'll just play golf 8 hours a day, whatever. But the trick is, first of all, you're probably never gonna retire, at least not like that.
Right.
And by the time you do, you're gonna be so beaten down through the grind, you're not gonna be thriving. It's at that point, it's gonna be about trying to live vicariously through others. Well, let me support my kids or my grandkids if I even can. Usually you're not supporting them. Usually you're moving in with them because you can't.
Right.
But that's the trade. The world has got most people bought in on this. Trade the top 2 for a false sense of certainty around the bottom 3. And I think what my book is about is saying, how dare you trade or even delay self-actualization out of existential somatic fear? Like, honestly, what are you so afraid of dying? If you make that trade, you're dead already.
Yeah. Yeah. Your book is a huge wake up call to the people that, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. said it really good in his book, the people that are domesticated. They're just conditioned to believe that. They're conditioned to accept that. And I love the fact that you go against the grain, break the mold, and you slap people in the face with your book and wake up. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to grind for it. You're going to have to rewire your brain for it. You're going to have to become quit-proof, right? You're going to have to do all of these things to get it, but it's worth it. It's there, right? Most people aren't even, I think that a lot of people aren't even aware of the top 2 levels, because once they get to safety and comfort, that's that. And they're like, okay, yeah, like you said, I'll retire and we'll do it then, play golf, whatever. But, and that's why I love your story so much, and I love your book so much, and I love Entre so much, that I cannot recommend it any higher than because it allows people freedom. It allows people a way to go all the way to the top of the food chain, where most people don't realize that we're in a country where they won't actually kill you for doing that.
Yeah, they won't put you in prison even if you can't pay your debts.
Right.
Which in most countries throughout most of human history, if you owed somebody money and couldn't pay, you went to debtor's prison.
Debtor's prison.
Like we act so scared now. What are we actually scared of? And by the way, this isn't a new condition. I mean, Ben Franklin said most men die at 25. They just don't get buried till 75.
Amen to that.
Like we've always been, selling this trade to kids, but it got really, really pronounced post-industrial revolution, post-factory education model, post-retirement-based banking and financial services model. There's been a few macro forces installed into society in the last 120 years, roughly, that have basically made it so that there's such powerful interests that are built on the basis of this exchange, that it's not just like a human nature thing. Now it's actually more of like an entrenched, almost, I would call it a complex. Like there's the military industrial complex. Yeah. There's the healthcare and big pharma complex. There's literally, I call it the broken system. There's an education, employment, retirement, collusion complex to get people to make that trade, so that by the time they ask the hard questions, it's too late and they feel stuck.
Yeah. Which is go to college, pay big bucks. Like you said, never be able to pay off your student loan, be a slave.
Even a mortgage. Like obviously most people, there's an entrenched belief in society that your mortgage is your greatest asset. It's how most people build the majority of their wealth. I know this isn't this is one I still have my work cut out to convince people of. I believe that 30-year, and by the way, I saw somebody say in our lifetime, we will see 100-year mortgages. And I remember when one of the 11 businesses I tried to start was actually being a loan officer back in 2006, 2007. And they were Countrywide at the time, which went out of business on the basis of this whole fallacy, by the way, but they were doing 50-year mortgages 15 years ago or 18 years ago. Wow. And I think that's one of the ways. Think about what that does to it, but think about how that affects a person's decision-making to have 30 years where they can't even take a month off from work to figure out what they want to do with their life because they're afraid they'll lose their house.
Right. And if you, and here you go, listeners, if you want a better option, go to Entre Institute, look into it, look into Jeff's book. It's the key to freedom. And we're going to have to wrap it up, but obviously I want to have you back, but what I want to do before we wrap it up is like, what's next for Jeff Lerner? What's going on? What's in the future?
I appreciate that. Honestly, it's interesting because the more successful Entre has gotten, the more or the less I desire to do anything else. Like, yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur and I have investments in other businesses and I have, investments in cash flow assets, but like time-wise, energy-wise, focus-wise, I don't really think of Entre as like an online education platform. I actually feel like it's my opportunity to embody what we teach our students, which is that you can find a way to make a living and live your purpose at the same time. And I truly believe that I am on this earth now to help awaken other people to that truth, and that Entre is my vehicle for doing that. So at this point, I'm all in trying to scale the influence and impact of Entre. I mean, yeah, there's like quantitative monetary targets for what, whether it's enterprise value or revenue or number of students, number of customers, but like, it's really more about, I'm trying to, I don't know, I guess how to say it. Like, I know I'm not going to save the whole world. Like, I can't save everyone, but I can save anyone. Anyone that'll listen.
That's so well said. Are you going to write another book?
I am. At some point, I was literally talking to my wife about this weekend. I think it's going to be the story of Entre though. So I need to wait a few more years because there's a whole podcast episode in what I've had to go through and what I've had to learn to take a purpose and turn it into a business while resisting the forces of business that want to diminish purpose and replace it with the profit motive and ultimately rip the mission apart based on short-term thinking, because that is how capitalism plays out in the world today. Mm-hmm. Is it's very short-sighted, it's very earnings focused. There's a whole discussion between shareholder economics and stakeholder economics. But at this point, Entre is a mission on a lot of different levels, and it's brutal. And there's a book to be written about it when the time comes.
That's great. And I want to have you back on because I want to talk about the retreats that you and your wife do. When I read, you're talking about nonviolent communication and with your wife, and there's a story there. My wife and I are doing that. It's changing our marriage for the better. And so I want to have you back on, if you will. I want to talk about all those things. There's just so much more to Jeff Lerner that can be packed into an hour. It's just unbelievable. So there's more if you're willing. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart as your friend, and also just because of what you're doing for humanity. I'm truly grateful, and I'm grateful for having you on.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I would be honored and pleased to be back for part 2. And it's interesting you mentioned nonviolent communication. I was explaining this to someone yesterday. I'm trying to make Entre the first, I don't know if it's the first company, but let's say the most successful, most visible embodiment of a for-profit corporation that's built on a foundation of nonviolent communication, both internally and with our customers.
Explain that real quick so that people understand what that is. If you can do it real quick, then just
yeah, I can. So NVC, or nonviolent communication, it's a language framework. It's a communication theory that was created by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg, who was a psychologist back in the 60s and 70s is when it kind of emerged. You can go to the Center for Nonviolent Communication online and learn more about it. But basically, at its essence, it's about learning to communicate in a way that has no power dynamics embedded into the language you use. So whether it's a parent speaking to a child, or a CEO speaking to his team, or a personal trainer speaking to his really out of shape client, or whatever, like there's always power dynamics that are apparent. But if you can learn to speak in a way where that power dynamic is completely absent from your language, it produces a feeling in people that is like so refreshing and different and pure and unlike the rest of the world. There's like an alchemy that happens. We talk about attraction marketing. It's like people don't know why it feels so good to be in various types of relationships with you, but they know that it does. And you know that it's because of your language. And I would say, imagine a company that was like I think we all idealize like a peaceful, loving home. Imagine if you go to work every day and it could feel like that too, and still be like a kick-ass, high performance, high profit, kind of quasi-aggressive capitalist enterprise. But it doesn't have to, I say aggressive, it doesn't have to feel that way.
Right. And since words are the most powerful tools that we have as human beings, it becomes down to how you use them. And if you use them in an appropriate way, people don't get triggered and get defensive and get weird and stuff like that. I'll give you
a quick example that sort of illustrates how counterintuitive this can be. If you're, let's say you go sit in the bleachers and watch your child have a basketball game, and at the end of down to the wire, 2 seconds left, they get fouled, down by 1, they sink both free throws, they win the game. Let's say it's the state title, right? Your team, crowd goes nuts. Driving home, just you and your kid, they just won the state championship with some clutch free throws. What do you say? Son, I love seeing you so happy. As opposed to, I'm so proud of you. Because if I'm so proud of you, if I'm conditioning, if I'm implying even as a parent that the way you feel about a situation is at all tied to how I feel about you in that situation, then what I giveth, I can taketh away. And I could just as easily the next time say, I'm disappointed in you. So praise is actually a violent form of communication. As opposed to, I love seeing you happy. Man, I'll bet that felt good when the crowd went wild. Tell me about it. I can still I can still celebrate the moment with them without having to remind them that I have the power to judge them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done. Well done. That was a perfect analogy of how it works. So we're going to have to shut down right now, but I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. This was a little bit selfish on my part. I wanted to have Jeff on, but you get to benefit from it too. And Jeff, thanks so much for being on the official Quitproof podcast. We love you. I love being your friend. Everybody, get Jeff's book, Unlock Your Potential. Go check out Entre Institute if you are sick and tired of being sick and tired of being a slave to the system, and you want freedom and you're willing to work for it. So thanks again, Jeff.
If you like this video, hit that subscribe button and share this with some of your friends.